Hello again, my name is Patrick Foster, and we're here today to bring another in our continuing series of interviews for the Nash Heritage Preservation Project. I'm particularly excited with our guest today because this is a man who had one of those coveted jobs as a stylist. It's always been my belief that Nash styling was different from other cars of the period, and the people we have to thank for that are the Nash designers and the Nash stylists. The gentleman we're going to be talking with today is Alan Kornmiller, who had a career with Nash Motors and American Motors in the 50s. Alan, let's start up. Why don't you tell us, when did you begin working for American Motors?
I worked for American Motors, or went over to American Motors from Ford Motor Company in about 1952.
Oh, okay.
And the latter part of 1952, and then I spent about 3.5 years with them up to 56.
Okay, so it must have been Nash Motors at the beginning and then
Yes,
American Motors later on.
Nash Motors first.
Okay. And who hired you over at Nash?
Ed Anderson.
Okay, so you went directly into styling.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you were a stylist at Ford before that?
Ford Motor Company, which is an interesting story, and it's attached to American Motors because I worked for about a year at Ford Motor Company, worked on the Thunderbird and the Vedette, and then saw an ad in the paper that American Motors, or Nash at that time, was hiring. And of course at that time all the major automobile manufacturers were attempting to set up a design department, as they were all doing. And Ford Motor Company showed the way by hiring all the GM people and bringing them in and getting started, so Nash was attempting to do the same thing. So I went over there and spoke to Ed Anderson directly, showed him my portfolio for the limited time that I was in at Ford Motor Company. And we negotiated a contract and said, fine, I'll be there on Monday. And so that's what made the move. But I had 2 kids at the time, so I could use the money, and that was the primary motivation. But,
did you know Ed Anderson prior to?
Prior to that, I had not known him, no.
Or heard anything about him? Because I understand he had been in General Motors prior to this.
Yes. Well, I did know that Ed Anderson was busy setting up a design office for Nash at the time. And that was important to me because I could be on the ground floor, you know. So.
Now, Ford, though, was the second largest car company probably in the world at the time. How did it feel for you, young man aside, but to be going from working for Ford to a small company like Nash?
It wasn't easy. It was, you know, I made every effort to get into Ford Motor Company after I got out of Cleveland. And so I was a little disappointed in myself that I couldn't stay longer, but it was appropriate with 2 kids. And me being up here, and the money was good, and that was worthwhile move for me.
Okay. When you went to work for Ed Anderson, what work did he put you doing?
Designing cars right away. We did mostly, the initial thing was doing Rambler front ends and the Nash grills and the big Nash Ambassador, cutting the front wheel openings open. So that the car would turn into a Sears and Roebuck service garage without having to back up once and then go back in again. So that was always a funny story. If you took your car over for service over on Woodward Avenue there and you went to turn in the Sears and Roebuck, you couldn't make it in one turn. There was a 54-foot turning radius. You know, you wouldn't do it, so you had to back up, take another swing. So, but that was one of the funny things we laughed about. But,
well, I know talking to Ed Anderson in the past, and Bill Reddick, another Nash designer, they all said that the designers didn't particularly care for the enclosed wheels that the Nash had, but it was kind of dictated from management.
Yes. Well, the initial version, because when I was there, I got a chance to work with Panine Farina. You know, they brought him over. He was a consultant, and he had developed the basic sketch for that. I'm going to say 52 Nash Ambassador. If I get the years mixed up a little bit, well, you correct me. And so with the huge front fenders and all that, we wanted to lighten up everything, get everything looking skinnier than what it was, because the fender radius, I think, was 15, their diameter was 15 inches. It's pretty husky. And so that was one way of doing it. So.
And you got to meet Panine Farina?
Panine Farina came over, and as a matter of fact, at that time, Nash had contracts with Dick car bit.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's the one that did the Texaco ads and most of the magazine
Yeah.
ads and some other futuristic gasoline ads.
He did
And
some
so-
work for Packard too, I remember.
Yes, he did. And he was a consultant, and so was Panini Farina. And that's why George Mason at the time purchased that Nash Healy, they had down in the garage there. And that's, I think, why Ed Anderson eventually bought the Nash Healy also, and tooled around in the silver out to Romeo, Michigan.
Hmm.
But he came over, and he was to help us because, it was important and that we participate with him in developing the car. So he came over. Ed Anderson assigned me to it. Hey, you go ahead and you work with him, and Al will do anything you want. So I can recall the funny part of it is holding up sweeps on the roof of this car. It was a big, whatever it was, 8 sweep. And he said, yeah, and I draw the line on this huge full-size line drawing. And he would turn to me, and I was just, anything he wanted to do, I'd go get him a glass of water if he wanted. And he said, you like? Oh yeah. What was I going to say? No, the line is terrible. I wouldn't do that. So, but that was funny. You like. Me shaking my head. Well, you just tell me, chicken. But
well, funny. Did he have much real input on the Nash design?
Primarily in the renderings that they were paying so heavily for. He sent these renderings over, which are about this big, and they were Italian looking, very foreign looking, everything sloughed off, not American. He puts those fenders straight out there. But he always spent hours, or he did, or his design staff did, and they would render this Farina medallion down in the corner, which was the F with the red and blue behind it. And this thing was done meticulously, like was cloisonné, right on this render. Beautiful. And they would come over. Now they had paid several $1,000s, tens or thousands of dollars for this advice, so you couldn't ignore it. Ed Anderson couldn't either. He was under a little bit of pressure too, of working with Nash and putting together a design section, which was what he did in the early years, was put together a design group that Nash could say, okay, we've got our own design group now. We've got 7 guys in there, we've got 13 guys in there, and they can go on, they can do pretty good cars.
Was the staff that small?
Well, when I first got there with Ed Anderson in the design room, there were 3 people. It was Al Musachuk, Don Butler, and myself. The 3 of us. And Ed Anderson and Bill Reddick, so that's 5 all total.
Yeah.
And at a later date, more people were brought in. But initially, and then Thomas out in the drafting area, and then the clay modeling group, Charlie Green. Yeah. They were out there. So it was a very small operation. So, and you sort of had to produce. They weren't used to having a staff of 7 people. And the design department was done usually through engineering. An engineering guy used to get in with a Nash car, and if it tipped his hat over while you raised the roof an inch, and that was that. Like with Chrysler, with KT Keller. So that's essentially where we were at that time. So.
Yeah. And did the engineering people come in a lot to where you were?
Yes.
Wahlberg or Meade Moore?
Ted Ulrich.
Ted
Ulrich and Meade Moore, who was the vice president of engineering, came in frequently and was very much interested in what we were doing, and I thought very highly of him. Yeah. And Ted Ulrich also. It's pretty hard. They only get, after all, it takes about the same number of dollars to tool a fender for Nash in '52 as it did for Chevrolet. Yes. They sold 1 million units, and we sold 68,000. So it makes a big difference when you have to pay for that tooling. So you really want it to be right, and you aren't going to change it next year. Yeah. Chevrolet, of course, could afford to tool the first set of fenders and then sell 1 million Chevrolets in 1 year, and then turn around and refine the fender, with some tool improvement, which we'd have to run 3 years before we could even touch it. So that's a big difference.
Yeah. So, and yet Nash Styling always looked a couple of years ahead of everybody else.
Yes, it did very well. And as a matter of fact, frequently when someone would come from Milwaukee, and I can recall a few young men coming from Milwaukee and driving their Nashes with them, and coming wanting to talk to someone in the styling department, Ed would say, "I'll go on down and talk to him." Okay, beautiful car, not a mark on it. And he drove all the way from Wisconsin, and oh yeah, he's following Nash. They're going to do this, and are they going to do that? And they're going to do that. And of course, he would read all the exotic articles that people like you would write in these magazines. That boy, Nash was going to come out with this, and the powerful V8, and which we had in the works, you know, so you try to acknowledge as much of that as you can.
Now you worked in the building on Plymouth Avenue.
Yes.
Plymouth Road, rather.
Plymouth Road, yeah.
Yeah. The old, which was the old Nash Kelvinator headquarters.
Yes, Nash Kelvinator. We were up on the, well, I'm going to mix the floors up. We were either up on the second floor, Nash, the refrigerator unit was up on the third floor above us, and it was always sort of funny.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's right. So.
Were those plush studios? I see pictures of them. That's why I ask, and they look kind of.
You mean the Nash Design Studios?
Yeah.
Well, don't forget that that building was a warehouse,
Mm-hmm.
and you can tell by the windows if you look at the steel casement windows. And then, and as a matter of fact, in one instance, I just got done with a rendering, full-size rendering of this 126-inch wheelbase Hudson, and we pulled it over on the side, and the show was the next day with Ed Anderson and George Romney, and we left the windows open, those steel casement windows that open up this way. Well, a little bit of rainstorm hit, it hit at an angle, and splashed across that render. And we came in the morning, here's all this, you know, gray, misted up completely, and so Ed says, well, quick, get your airbrushes out. But once you water stain a nice rendering like that, you just cannot spray over it. We tried to and did the best we could, but it was mostly white to cover it up. So, yeah.
I wonder whatever happened to those big full-size drawings.
I don't know. I wonder, didn't you get them?
I keep looking for them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But those would be great things. There's so many of them in all the car companies.
At Nash and at American Motors. Did you know Bill Reddick while you were there?
Yes. Bill Reddick was a fine guy, and he worked very close to Ed Anderson when I came over there, and you know, assisted tremendously in keeping the group together. And then, you know, after all, it was pretty much a brand new thing with more than one person running it. So for the first time, Charlie Green was setting up a clay operation and getting clay modelers in and bringing them in. You know, now you had more people out there and more responsibility all the way around. And when we worked for Nash, which is an important part of my life, we worked, everybody did everything.
Mm-hmm.
When the interiors had to be done, we did the interiors. When the roof had to be done, we did the roof, tail light, the ornamentation.
Oh, okay.
And then when you worked, now they weren't the big profit-making organization that some of the other companies were, but when you worked at 8 o'clock in the morning till 4 in the afternoon, and then you went on overtime. And when you worked till midnight, which you did frequently, and you're still putting the show together till 2 in the morning, well, from midnight on, you didn't get time and a half. You only got straight time until you put your 8 hours in the next day. And here you are going home at 3 in the morning, you know, straight time for the last 3 hours. It's not very funny at the time. That was perhaps one of our bigger complaints, but that's the way that wouldn't happen nowadays. But.
Yeah. Now, as a young man working at Nash, how did it feel to work on a Rambler? Because that was really like a young person's car, wasn't it?
Yes, it was, yeah. I'm going to say hardtop convertible is a sedan convertible, really, wasn't it?
Yeah.
The 54.
Yeah, they used to call those hardtop convertible
yeah.
When it had what we would ordinarily just call a hardtop nowadays.
A great following.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it'd get letters in. A lot of people supporting the unit body and the all-weather eye, dual speakers, you know, stuff that everybody now has. You know, the gee whiz, but American Motors had that, or Nash had that years ago. You know. And,
I remember people when the 55s came out in the senior cars and the 56 with the headlights in the grill.
yes.
And people complaining about that. You know, what a silly place to put headlights in the grill. Well, by the 60s, every car had the headlights in the grill.
It was that was not an easy thing to live with. It was so easy. Enough people could talk you into doing it, like the way Chevrolet would do it, or General Motors would do it, or Ford would do it. But to stick with those fenders outboard like that, with the headlights inboard, you know, with the oval grille like Ferrari or Farina, was not an easy thing for Ed to accomplish and stay with it. As a matter of fact, you can see that when the large Hudson was made and when the large Nash Ambassador was made, those prototypes, both of them had circular headlights.